We're not obviously in the studio. We're at the Baha'i Faith Worship Center on 16th and Montague. I'll be interviewing the resident manager of the Baha'i Faith Worship Center, Mr. Neadoy Glover. Welcome, Neadoy.
Thank you.
I want to say a little bit about you. Of course, you're a native Washingtonian, which you're very proud of.
I'm proud of that. Yeah.
And as I already said, you're the resident manager at the Baha'i Faith Worship Center. Your father.
Proud of that too.
Proud of that too.
Blessed by that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a blessing to serve, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Neadoy's a father. He's a scholar. He's a mentor of youth. He's also an Uber driver. He's constantly, one of the things I appreciate about Neadoy a lot, he's constantly working on his own transformation. He's constantly studying. He's constantly reading books. He's constantly watching documentaries, always trying to elevate himself and helping to elevate other folks as well. And he's also a co-author of a book called 12 Angry Black Men. Is that correct?
12 Angry Men.
12 Angry Men. Excuse me.
Yeah.
12 Angry Men.
I think there's a movie by that title.
Yeah, there is a movie. I think they've done it a couple of times.
Yeah.
Neadoy, like so many black men, has been wrestling with how to handle his emotions and his feelings around the shootings of black men that have been taking place actually in the nation, and then followed by the shooting of policemen and trying to reconcile feelings around that, around the issues. Really, what we talked about last week. The conflict that's coming up around Black Lives Matter, and then Blue Lives Matter come up, and then we have conflict about that. And so all of these things create a lot of tension and emotions that we're all trying to navigate. And as black men who have been the victims of many of the shootings, we have a particular kinds of challenges. But I want to address it. Last week I talked with some parents. I talked with actually one parent and two children, 13-year-old and 11-year-old, about just how they're viewing the tensions in the community. How are they receiving it? How are their friends receiving it? How are the parents talking to their kids about this? What do they bring up? Do they watch? Let them watch the videos. So how are parents and children reconciling this? And so we had a conversation about that. It was very powerful. I want to talk to Neadoy about similar things, but I want him to just share really some of his experiences, some of his feelings, but also I think it's important that we look at the role of religion. Religion has been the anchor for the black community for years, in good times and in bad. Some people have turned away from religion, but I think religion and spirituality really has a role in how we are able to handle the really gripping and tense and really just emotional feelings that we have about what's taken place. And so we want to bring in the role of religion, and Neadoy happens to be a member of the Baha'i Faith, so that's a perspective that we'll come from, and we'll talk about that. So that's what this show will be about. My first question to all of our guests, and Neadoy included, is the name of the show is See the Heaven in Every Black Face. And I said it's taken from my book, Seeing Heaven in the Face of Black Men. And I always like to ask our guests, when you think about seeing heaven in every black face, what do you think about? What are you seeing when you see the heaven in every black face?
First thing always comes back to I see God's creation.
Mm-hmm.
I see a manifestation of the Creator.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing I think of when you say seeing heaven in the black, So it just reminds me of our Creator.
Right.
Yeah.
And speak up just a little, just so we make sure the microphone picks up.
So it reminds me of our Creator, the beauty within.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And really the idea of this, and I actually talked to I was talking to actually a white female the other day, and she came up to me and she told me that, just when she heard that title, Heaven in the Face of Black Men, it's changed the way she looks at black men. She said that she sees black men in a different way, and she's kind of acknowledged some things that were in her head about black men that she didn't want to be there. And just the idea of seeing heaven in the face of black men has changed her perception. So I think it's a powerful image. And the idea is if we're able to transform ourselves to embrace that image and see heaven in each other's face, how do you think that will change the ways that we interact just among each other, among people who are black?
I think it'll make, we'd be less reactionary.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of heaven, so that the visible heaven is upward, right? It's high. It's above the material world. It's above the material world that our feet are planted on. So it's upward. And so I think what that would do was activate the inner reality, the spiritual reality, right?
Right.
If that is activated, then we treat each other like noble beings. We treat each other godlike,
Right.
With these characteristics of God, which is compassion, love, kindness, right?
Right.
And if you think about all the manifestations, that's how they always treat each other, and not only the prophets themselves, but their disciples, right?
Okay.
This is, and so I guess in that vein, we'll treat each other in a whole different light,
Yeah. That's what we have to get to. I mean, it's we have to. We've been through a lot of pain. We've been through a lot of agony. The emotional part of us, the part that's been wounded, often creates dysfunctional behavior. Often the way we've been brainwashed to even see each other sometimes appeals to our lower nature, our lowest common denominator. But we've always had that inner depth of spirituality, and sometimes it just gets covered up. And I think the way you described it, this is how the disciples treated each other. They saw the heaven in each other's face, and all the prophets of God have really, they don't use that term necessarily, but that's what they're saying. See God in everybody, see the heaven in everybody, and that should impact how we treat each other. So that's the goal. And I was so happy to hear, and I've heard this from different people, that just thinking of heaven in the face of black men is profound for a lot of people. So, Neodoy, you've had a lot of experiences growing up. You're a Washingtonian. You've had a lot of it. You've seen a lot of changes in Washington. You've grown up black in Washington, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so, there's something from my book I'm going to read, and then I'm just going to ask you a question. And it goes like this. This is one of the first chapters of my book. It says, "It sure is a trip waking up black in America." I said, "It sure is a trip waking up black in America." Does anyone hear me? Do you hear what I'm saying? I'm telling anyone that'll listen, it's a trip waking up black in America, and it was a trip waking up colored, Negro, Afro-American, African-American, a person of color, and a person of African descent as well. Anyway, some time ago, I was so frustrated and angry about the racial experiences I was having, I thought to myself and said out loud, "It sure is a trip waking up black in America." So, Nito, when you hear that, it's a trip waking up black in America, I want you to kind of think about that statement and connect it to what it's been like for you growing up as a black man in Washington, D.C., particularly from a racial standpoint.
You don't understand what it's like for you until you have other things to compare it with. Right. And so for me, growing up, first of all, I think I was extremely blessed to grow up in a black community, more of a community with a distinct culture, a distinct way of talking, distinct way. So that was a blessing. But and you asked me again, what was the
well, just your experiences growing up, in Washington, D.C., particularly from a racial standpoint.
So you have to understand that most of the people from my school, the teachers, the bus drivers, the lawyers, all the people in our community was black. So from a racial standpoint, I didn't have understanding of a racial standpoint until later. I got a little bit removed as things started to change. And so until I started to become more conscious of reality in general. And I think, one thing that when I look back, I realized that, how the community was underserved. I realized one thing I always remember about being educated, going to school. I went to Coolidge High School. One thing I always remember in Paul Junior High is that I remember when we came into a school, they gave us books with no cover, a hardback book with no cover on it, like it was tattered. And so that's your introduction to learning, right? That's the first introduction. And so as a result, learning was not a part of what, learning that what they want is, and then you don't see no reflection of yourself in these books, right? And then so you have all these kids, you have these people, and so then you have other outside influences. You have drugs. When I was coming up, it was the murder capital. So, and then of course the people who were murdered was black. So look from a racial standpoint in that. You have one of the highest prison populations in the country. Looking from a racial standpoint, black, and they're black. And so, I guess growing up black, you realize, especially in D.C., later you realize how resources weren't given to you. And then it seems from a certain standpoint that the community was attacked.
Yeah.
You don't know how, you don't know from what situation, but you realize that community. You realize when you have these drugs that's not being created in manufacturing communities, that's flooding communities. You wonder like,
Where is this coming from?
where is this coming from?
Right.
And we realize when the system starts to change and people start to do major time for nonviolent crimes, and you start looking back, you realize like this, black people always talk about conspiracy theories, but it's not too much of a conspiracy when you realize that corporations are making money off of heads in prisons. So,
Right.
all these things you start to think about
Right.
as you become more conscious,
Right.
so that's like,
So it's not a stretch saying it's a trip waking up black in America, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not-
But it's a
not
blessing.
It's mixed bags, right? It depends on, and we'll talk about that, how we see these things. I mean, the challenge is, we had such a different life experience growing up. You grew up in Washington, D.C., all black community. I grew up in Minnesota. We were the only black family for 10 years, for 15 miles in any direction.
yeah.
So you had the racial experience of looking at these textbooks that were tattered
Yeah.
and didn't have anybody, well, not too many people of African descent in the textbook. So, why do you want to learn? And here I'm around all white folks and don't see any other black folks, and then we're not in the textbook. And so what am I thinking? Well,
Yeah.
something must be wrong with us because here all these white people are and they're in the textbook. So
Yeah.
but really similar conclusion.
Yeah.
You really, and it works on your psyche. I
Yeah.
think it works on your psyche. So, one of the things we do want to talk about, we're going to get into some of the things that are happening in society, and part of the goal is just to talk about, how religion helps us to deal with these things. But I've known you for a long time now, and I know you consider yourself a religious person. But what does that mean to you? What does religion mean to you, and what does it really mean to you to be what you would consider a religious person? Because sometimes nowadays it's almost like a negative thing. You say, "Oh, I'm a religious person."
Yeah.
People think often, oh, they must just be rigid. They must be bigots. They must, not like this person or like that person. What does it mean to you to be a religious person?
Well, it's a knowledge base, right? I was just reading by a journal by a Baha'i scholar named Nadir Saidi, and one thing he was talking about was like, so science is a knowledge base of the material world, right? So religion is a knowledge base for the inner and the spiritual world. So I look at religion as a guidepost for the inner world and the spiritual world, which, from my understanding, is the real world, right? Because this world changes, but the world that we all have to deal with is the inner world. That's the first environment, your inner thoughts, and then from there it becomes how you manifest it. Everything works from within. Even me moving my hands like this, it's inner mechanisms that are being activated for me to do everything that I'm doing right now, right? And then in the spiritual world, likewise. So for me, religion is a guidepost for reality,
right.
which is the inner reality.
It's a powerful description. I've never heard really put that way. It's religion and spirituality. Those are two things that go hand in hand in some people's mind. You have people saying spiritual but not religious. That's a trend, I think, in the United States right now.
I don't like that trend.
Yeah, I know you don't like that trend. But why do you think people are turning away from religion, and why do you think they want to say I'm spiritual but not religious?
Because religion is not being manifested, right? Religion. I think one thing that's interesting about society and especially the Western society and media and propaganda is that people say stuff, and if they say it enough, it becomes reality, right? And so, if people have used Christianity, people have used Islam, people have used all these religions to oppress others,
Right.
and so people see these forms of oppression, and they connect that with religion.
Right.
But all you have to do is open up the book.
Right.
The book is and now we're in an age that even for us who can read, especially in the Western world, we have access to learning how to read,
Right.
and we can open up the book for itself and see what it says.
Right.
Because any religion that's oppressive is not religion,
Right.
Regardless of whose mouth it's coming from.
Right.
And so I think that's been the, along with other materialists like Marx with religion's the opiate of the masses, right?
Right.
So, and all these are material forms of reality, right?
Right.
So we just out here, we just living, and so it's been propagated, propaganda once again, and so people turn away from it because religion have enslaved people. Religion has killed people in the name. People have used the name of religion,
Right.
but it's contrary to the written text.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and so I think that's why people shun away from religion, because you hear these wars and all these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, it's one of these things where, for some reason, we have a way of looking at religion, seeing the negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though we know that many things have happened in our society. I mean, every moral code we have about love, about justice, about truth and honesty, you can say, well, that's just what I believe, but ultimately those things come out of religion. Religion teaches these things and how to be these things. All the kind of noble qualities that we admire in people, people who sacrifice for other people. Much of that comes out of religious teachings, whether people attribute it to religion or not. But we don't see that part of it. But I agree with you. I think because so many things have been oppressive about the way religion has been translated, I think that's a big part of why people are turning away from it. I wanted to read you something, and both of us share the same religion. I mentioned that, Neodo, you're a member of the Baha'i Faith. I'm also a member of the Baha'i Faith. And so I want to share like a passage. It says, "In truth, religion is a radiant light and an impregnable stronghold for the protection and the welfare of the peoples of the world. Should the lamp of religion," and I think this is talking about true religion, "be obscured, chaos and confusion will ensue, and the lights of fairness and justice, of tranquility and peace will cease to shine." Well, the prophet founder of the Baha'i Faith is named Baha'u'llah, and this is one of his teachings. Another passage says this. This is about what happens when religion no longer guides. And I think when we're talking about religion, again, we're talking about the teachings that help us to be moral beings in terms of how we treat each other, etc. It says a perversion of human nature, the degradation of human conduct, the corruption and dissolution of human institutions reveal themselves under such circumstances in their worst and most revolting aspects. And then it goes on to say human character is debased, confidence is shaken, and the nerves of discipline are relaxed, the voice of conscience is stilled, and the sense of decency and shame is obscured. And I think that's a pretty good description of many of the things that we're seeing. You know, I think religion has been obscured, and spirituality has been obscured. You know, it's in the Baha'i writings that there's religion and spirituality. My understanding, they go together. Mm-hmm. And there's a passage in the Baha'i writings that suggests that we have to you talked about that inner. Mm-hmm. We have to cultivate from an internal point. Religion guides us, but I think it's the spirituality, cultivating that sense of spirituality, that's the application of religion. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not just saying what you believe, but it's really trying to live those teachings to transform yourself, which then, because without that, if it's just laws or ways you have to do things, what the Baha'i Faith suggests is then religion just becomes dead. That's actually the word it uses. Religion becomes a dead thing, which I think is what's happened in many cases. And so just kind of moving from that, thinking that religion does have a role in society, it has a role in our lives, it has a role in transforming us. Do you think religion has a role, and what do you think the role of religion is in addressing issues of racial justice, of racial unity, of racial harmony, just issues around race? How can religion impact that?
Well, one thing that keeps popping in my mind is religion comes from a Latin word, religare, and it means, like, if I'm not mistaken, to bind. Mm-hmm. To bind men with the gods. Mm-hmm. You know, and so, you know, I think that's the fundamental basis of what religion is for. And so you saying, I'm sorry, you saying,
yes, how does religion,
how
can it impact, how can religion impact racial justice, racial unity?
You know, so as a Baha'is, first, we believe that God is one, mm-hmm. and religion is one. Mm-hmm. And so, but it's progressive. Mm-hmm. And so, and now, you know, just like if I said, Todd, are you the same person you were when you were 20? And you can say,
I hope not.
Yeah, exactly. But you are. At the same time, you are, but you aren't.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's maturity level, right? You grew, you did, you know, and so religion is like that. It progresses. Mm-hmm. It changes, and the social changes. And so right now, as a Baha'i, in this what we call a dispensation, this time, mm-hmm. the Word of God now talks about that. When Christ says a lot of things we can't talk about is because of the circumstances. He couldn't talk about other worlds and these things when most people live centuries in one village, right? So now Baha'u'llah says, mankind is a citizen of the earth, and mankind is one. And so now, and it talks about unity, racial and gender unity, right? Now it's so in this dispensation, it talks about that we are all one. We are part of a human body. We are all one. That the only reason for these racial makeups is because of environmental circumstances, right? Science proves this, that mankind come from the same source, right? And so I think these are the things that can change the human heart, right? Because like I said before, religion is a guidepost for the human heart, for the spirituality. And I think another thing that I feel like is important, if people say spirituality, I can be spiritual here, I can be spiritual there. But just like the law of nature, everything is governed by law. If the earth moves by a couple centimeters, we will either freeze or burn to death. But it's governed by a certain law. Every nature, so humans must be governed by a certain law. So I believe that this law is the Word of God, right? And this law, and now the Word of God is saying we are all one. Essentially, we are all one human body. We are made from the same source. So this right here is telling us that we have to become one and move as one. And so this is the law for mankind, right? In this day, right? This is the law to govern our reality, right? And so I think that's why religion is important outside of spirituality. Because spirituality, I can say I'm spiritual. This I can do. I do whatever I feel like. This ultra individualism that's been promoted by materialists, right? I can do whatever I want, like as long as I don't harm anybody else. But that's, if you look at society now, it's it's not serving the interest not only of mankind but interest of the physical world. Nature, now we consuming so much because we can do whatever we want as long as we don't hurt nobody. But we don't realize that there are effects to these things that we do. And so religion is that guide for mankind, right? If we become one, when we become one, then what can we do? Right? If we become one, right? How will we develop in the future?
If we have that consciousness.
If we have that consciousness of oneness. When I look at you and I see God, right? I see a manifestation of the Creator.
That's an important point. I mean, you talked about progressive. You used the term religion is progressive, and can you just go into that just a little bit more, because I think people may not know exactly what that means in terms. Because I know when you said religion is one, but it's progressive. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I think it's important people understand. What that exactly means.
So when I say progressive, I mean continually. Okay. One thing I think of is, I remember I always had this concept years ago about the stairs, right? If I'm going up to the top floor, I have to step on one stair, but there's another stair above it, and I step another. So it's progressing towards a certain realm, right? And so when I say progressive, I mean that that it is continually changing and moving forward. Just like when if you're in anything, if I'm traveling from here down to U Street and I'm driving, I'm progressing towards that spot, right? And so that's how as Baha'is we view religion, that it's progressing towards something, and that something we believe is what Christ talked about, what's in the gospel about the kingdom of God on earth. Right.
That's where we're going.
That's where we're going. That's the stage.
And you use steps, and I use something similar of the religions of God. Abraham to Moses to Christ, Krishna, Buddha. That they're all chapters in the same book of God's one religion. Versus
exactly. And when you read a book, what are you doing? You're progressing towards something.
Right.
You're progressing regardless.
Right.
How good or bad the book is, you're progressing to a certain point, to a conclusion.
And And I think what Baha'is were saying is that Baha'u'llah is the latest
Yeah.
messenger or manifestation of God, and as you said, his teachings all center around bringing about the oneness of the human family,
Yeah.
which is when you think about the history of the world, it's a history of otherness. It's a history of seeing each other as other.
Yeah.
So religions see each other as other, people see each other, ethnic groups see each other as other, political parties see each other as other, not one.
Yeah.
And there's always been this kind of a competitive thing that's been going on, me against them, and
Yeah.
that's a whole consciousness. Even our systems are set up in an adversarial way, in a competitive way, against each other, right? We call them adversarial systems, even,
Yeah.
right?
And it's so interesting you say that, because another thing I was just reading is that is the law of nature.
Right.
That's that competitiveness.
Right.
That, you hear people say dog eat dog,
Right.
right? Only the strong survive. That's the material world. That's the animal world,
Right.
right? But we live on it. We are in a heavenly world,
Right.
like you talk about heaven, and heaven is above, right, the ground, right?
Right.
And so, and all from Egypt, and you see all these different things about that animal body and the head on top. All that means is controlling the lower nature, the darkness, and the higher nature, right? The higher nature is God, that God nature.
Right.
And so, it just makes me think about that,
Yeah, and we have to put that into kind of the practical realm. I mean, okay, so we believe in these things in this higher nature, and then we start to think about how we bring that into the practical realm. But I don't want to talk about this for a long time. But okay, so this is really a Christian culture. Some degrees, there are more Muslims than there used to be, but many Christians in this country, right? And so, how did you come to the Baha'i faith? I mean, how did you decide to become a Baha'i among the many religions that are out there?
Well, I grew up in a Christian and a Baha'i household. So my mom is a Baha'i. And so I went. She always. My mom was in a wheelchair, so she didn't have access, wasn't able to take me around and do things. So one thing she always wanted me to go to my friends' different religions. So
Right.
it would be whether it be the mosque, or and so that's how she taught me progressive revelation, to go to these places, see what they're talking about. And so I came towards it because I was going through a crisis. Like I said, I grew up during the when murder capital, and so it was post-traumatic stress, right? You're dealing with you're trying to figure out the world. What is death? What is life? Why are these things happening? Why is there suffering? All these what all the philosophers and these questions. And so what happens is, I think when you're going through a crisis, you can either turn to outside circumstances, or go inwardly and try to figure out so because I grew up in a Christian and a Baha'i household, I grew up reading the Bible.
Right.
So I knew that there was, not even consciously but unconsciously, I searched for the questions that the inner questions I had through these religious texts,
Right.
And so as a result, I investigated Christianity. I was investigating Buddhism. So I investigated all, just like my mom taught me,
Right.
all these different religions.
Right.
And then finally I came across the Baha'i faith, and it tied all of them together. And the main thing was that when I was reading about Baha'u'llah means the glory of God, in the gospel it talks about the glory of God in Zion. And so for that, I can't remember the actual text, but the way it melded it, it was just amazing. I felt like, the Christ is back, God is back, So
It was a search, and I think that's, I think one of the things about religion too, clearly, is if we're, I want to use the words sincere in one sense, that we need to search religion for ourselves. I mean, the relationship with God is very profound, and I think sometimes people just blindly just do what their parents did, versus finding, searching for themselves, trying to find truth for themselves. And I think, as you say that, as you're talking, that's kind of what stood out. So you talked a little bit about the Baha'i faith in general. You talked about some general teachings. of the Baha'i faith. You kind of touched on the fact that we have a higher and lower nature, that our highest nature is spiritual, all these kinds of things. And you talked about, spiritual responses being kind of the highest responses. So let's just start talking a little bit about how the Baha'i faith helps you to deal with some of the challenges. We've talked, you're in my book, Seeing Heaven in the Face of Black Men, several times. And as you know, the way I wrote that book is it was kind of like a day in the life. And I was writing about the things that happen to black people kind of just as it unfolds, throughout my day. And so when something would happen in real time, I would stop whatever I was writing in the book and just put news flash, and I would write in there whatever happened that was related to race, and then I'd go back to what I was writing. And I stopped 2 or 3 times because of experiences that you had, that you called me about. So we've got all of what's going on in society. We've got the tension between the police and the black community and all the elements around that. I mean, we've got people getting killed, and then we have more black men getting killed, but it's also black women getting killed. We're finding that out. That just recently happened in Baltimore, just Monday, which is another tragic situation that rips at your heart. When a mother gets shot, with their child, it's the second time something like that's happened. Again, I don't know the facts. I'm not making accusations, but these are gut-wrenching things, right? And so we have to deal with these things that happen in society, but then you have to deal with these things that have happened to you personally. I think one time you said you'd been stopped like 26 times at least by the police at different times. You said one time, I'm telling all your business here, but you said one time in California, when you're in California, sometimes you just pull over anytime you saw a police because you knew they were going to pull you over. And the craziest one was when you told me you got pulled over riding your bike.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, this is real stuff for you. And so, like, tying into Baha'i faith and religion, to how you deal with that kind of emotional, really trauma.
So, one thing when I became Baha'i, I was reading something about a lot of the oppressed, the worst form of oppression is when the oppressed internalize their oppression. And so when I became a Baha'i, and I read the stories about the figures in the faith, the prophet founder, the disciples, they all suffered. Right, and matter of fact, he said they talk about we test gold by fire, right? It talks about we have come, and it's a Quranic verse that Baha'u'llah quotes. We have come for those who've been brought low in the land, and make them spiritual leaders among men. And so what happened was it empowered me. Not only that, it gives me a guidepost to turn to, right? So when these situations are happening to me, because I have, once again, religion sets a guidepost, right? And so one thing we do, we have what they call obligatory prayer. We have 3 different prayers that we can choose from, but I ask, we should say at least once a day, right? And so that right there, it's a guide. It guides me, right? It
keeps it
puts everything.
Right?
It keeps everything centered.
Yeah.
And so that right there is the main form with kind of it turns these injustices, the thing is, even a central figure in our faith, Abdu'l-Baha, talks about that smooth, he talks about that rough seas make a skillful sailor, right? The more you dig in the dirt, the more you plow, the richer the soil becomes. So all these things transform, these seemingly offenses into something that helps build my inner world, right? And so once again, it empowers me. I don't internalize it. So I don't internalize it and react in this materialistic animal world, right? So, but I see it as I hate to say a blessing, but almost a blessing, right? Because it's strengthening my spiritual resolve. And so that right there, from coming from historically oppressed class, now I feel like I'm coming from elite class. Not really elite, better than anybody else, but I feel like we're blessed. Like why, and historically throughout all times the people who did the most for justice suffered the most, right? And so I feel blessed to be within that camp, within those group of people.
Wow,
You know.
see, that's powerful. And I think there's an expression that says, "Change the way you see things, and the things you see will change." And it's more like, okay, not saying that the injustice in society is okay, and not saying it's all right, but saying that if we look at it a certain way, it can strengthen us. And really, what struck me about what you're saying is, I think when people suffer and they use that to transform themselves, there's a certain moral authority that they carry. There's a certain energy that they carry that's transformative for other people.
Yeah.
And so you look at the people, like you say, in history. I mean, people talk about Jesus Christ. Well, he suffered so much, right? But that, he was a prophet of God, but that gave him a certain authority to speak from, because he was using his suffering to be more loving, to be more caring, right? To transform society out of that suffering, which is a concept that comes out of religion, I think.
Yeah. And then look, another thing Baha'u'llah talks about is, he said, look at Christ, right? They said they were trying to follow Christ. He said, where am I going? I'm homeless. The stars is my lamp. The grass is my food, right? He talks about this. The seemingly homeless man, they killed him at 32, 33 as a young man. Nobody followed him. He only had a couple disciples, and then the disciples left. But Baha'u'llah said, now look how many kingdoms bow in his name, right? Like how powerful is that?
Right.
Like how many people, how many nations call themselves Christian? From this poor homeless man who seemed like he was his faith was destroyed, right? And so that empowers me, because in Baha'i faith, they killed over 30,000 Baha'is because of their faith. But now this is a worldwide religion, right?
Yeah.
Now you have people in villages who will greet you, in what we say, allow power, God, glory to God, And so that's what, once again, this oppressed and oppressor, right? But once you have that a spiritual world, as a matter of fact, I have something that I wanted to read I thought was...
And this is one of the many things that Brother Neodoy does. He studies all the time, and he takes notes, and he's always, when I said he's always transforming himself, he's always carrying around this book with things that are important. And it's really a model, really, to see you do that. But please.
So Baha'u'llah said, I swear by the most great light, no inhabitant of earth can exercise power over the confident believers of God, except that it be over the outward bodies, while they are powerless to establish ascendancy over the realms of the spirit.
Wow. It's very powerful. Yeah.
So that's like, you can attack my body, but you can't touch my soul.
Well, that's kind of what Nelson Mandela said when he was in prison. He said that they had him physically.
Yeah.
He said, but I still had my heart and my mind. I chose to keep that for myself. I chose not to give that to them, right?
Yeah.
He was really talking his heart and his mind and his soul. He was going to keep that for himself in the way that he treated people. And what I think is important about this is, one of the things I think that's important about this is that if we're going to end racism, there's got to be a transformation on everybody's part, right? And so the normal human emotions that guide us, the things that even hurt us, have to be transformed into levels of compassion, levels of understanding, which again, the key I think that's important, when you forgive people or when you're compassionate with people, doesn't mean what they're doing is okay. You're not saying it's all right. It's saying the manner in which I choose to deal with it, the manner in which I choose to change it, is going to come from this higher self, right?
Yeah.
Because that creates the model for what you want to happen. And so I think some people mistake that. And so there's this and I understand this in the black community right now. It's why do black people always have to be the ones to forgive? It's like we're always getting killed and we're always up there forgiving people. But I think that there's a power in that for the person doing that, right? If you carry that stuff with you, on the one hand, you're really just destroying yourself. But when you forgive, you're setting kind of a moral standard. You're elevating energy. You're appealing to people, the best in people, creating the possibility for change. If we just stay in them, I'm not saying you're not going to have feelings about losing people, but I think that's what religion can do.
And it's funny because what happens is you become Christ-like, right? You become Muhammad-like.
Right.
you become Buddha-like, right?
Right.
Because these people had the power of God behind them, but they were being persecuted. Even Muhammad, he was being persecuted for 13 years
Right.
before God gave him the okay to protect not him, but his community,
Right.
right? And so, and what happens over time is that you're changing reality,
Right.
and you're not internalizing the oppressor's ideology,
Right.
right? And so I think that's really powerful.
That's extremely powerful because in my book I say if I do that, if I internalize that behavior, term I use is I become a two-time loser.
Yeah.
First I'm dealing with oppression, and then I'm taking on the qualities of the people that are oppressing me. So
Yeah.
it's like that's the term I use. I'm a two-time loser. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna allow people to take my soul.
Yeah.
So there's and you and I talked about this, and I want to ask you kind of how you pulled yourself out of this, because when Mr. Castile and Mr. Sterling were killed, we were ripped.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And you called me, and you don't mind me saying you were in tears,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, and you're saying that they're killing us, Todd. They're killing us, and I think that's what a lot of people felt.
Yeah.
And how did you pull yourself? What did you do to how did you bring about healing of yourself to continue to keep the attitude that you're talking about?
Of course, instinctual, right? We all is mind over matter. For my first instinct was anger.
Right.
I wanted to lash out. I wanted to, but
yeah.
then, but after I prayed, after I, prayed for the family, after I thought about it, I just realized, I don't know, it's hard for me to even think about it because it was so emotional, but
Right.
in the end, truthfully what I thought is I need to do more, and one thing that
Do more in terms of
service, right?
right.
Because in our faith it talks about that the human body is like mankind, right? One affliction is going to hurt everybody.
Right.
Like the body, you feel the pain, right? And so in our faith it talks about that this world is destructive, and one is progressive, building up, right? It's this.
So two things are going on.
Two
at
things
once.
are going on. The higher the heat goes, the more pure, the more impurities, and the more the opportunities you have, right, to promote the spiritual reality to mankind.
Right.
And so, what it did was make me think about what can you do, right? But I could promote, because the worst oppression is not knowing who you are, and who you really are is God, small g.
Right.
Is a spiritual being.
Yeah.
This is who you really are, right? And once you have that, everything else, it doesn't matter. Then the outside circumstances can affect your inner world. And so, for me, it was just an opportunity, right? To what can I do? What does my faith to ask us to do, and to ask us to serve? And so we have these programs in all communities, all over the world, neighborhoods, villages, of prayer together, prayer with the community, prayer life.
And when you say the
classes.
community, you're not just talking about the
I'm
black
not talking
community.
about. I'm not talking about the Baha'i community nor the black community. I'm talking about the community where you live,
Right.
where your foot is, where you eat, where your neighborhood is. You start right there, and so
You're saying you gather people for
you gather people together for what we call devotional gatherings, which is a prayer gatherings. You have children classes. We have children's class for moral development. We have what we call junior youth for middle school age classes for moral development. And all this moral development, all this saying is empower. We're trying to raise that spiritual consciousness,
Right.
activate the inner world,
Right.
the real, actuate the God within, right?
Right.
And so that's what we can do.
Right.
We have studying the Word of God, and so these things, what it does is each, it's like the whole term, each one teach one, right? If my candle, though small lit as it is, if I can light another candle,
Right.
and we can keep lighting these candles, right? Because then you become empowered, right? Not mean power doesn't mean to, in the superficial, animalistic, natural world that we govern by, like, is power means to overcome someone else.
Right.
But in reality, power means to uplift someone else, to serve someone else.
Right.
Christ said it the best. He said the greatest among you must be slave of all.
Mm-hmm.
He said, for Christ came not to be served, but to serve
Mm-hmm.
and give his life as ransom for many.
Right.
Right? Once again, this is religion.
Right.
This is what Christ said.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the kind of activities Baha'is are doing, it's a service. It's not to necessarily make people Baha'is. It's to say, all right, well, how can we serve the community? How can we? Because when people are empowered and know who they are, then they can take control of their destiny. They can determine what they want in their community. They can transform their community. So it's about people understanding the reality of who they are, the transformative power of who they can be, and then taking that knowledge and serving their own communities. You say it takes a village to raise a child. I always say the village is sick.
Yeah.
So we got to heal the village so it can raise a child. And I think
Yeah.
in some ways that's what these activities are. And it's when you brought this up in the context of going through the suffering and pain that you were going through. One of the things that brought you out of it is you felt like, I'm going to serve more. I'm going to do more. I'm going to use this to motivate. And I had the same response, because when you dwell on too much what's
Yeah.
happening, it was paralyzing me. I mean, I had lost my mind for a while.
Yeah,
And I said,
yeah.
all right, one, I needed to pray, like you're saying, all those things, but I also had to say, all right, now I need to go out and do something. It's got to motivate me to change and be stronger in the community. There's
And I think another thing you said is pray. But a lot of times people think religion is just about prayer,
Right.
and this passive prayer.
Yeah.
But you said you prayed and then you did something about
Right.
it. So if
Right.
prayer doesn't lead to action,
Right.
then what is it?
and I got to tell you, about one of these gatherings. You talk about devotional gatherings, these prayer gatherings. I mean, these are powerful things. You bring together people of different religions, right, of different backgrounds, whatever background they're from, as community, not in a church, a synagogue, but in people's homes, right, as neighbors. And so, and the relevance of that. I just went to a prayer gathering, and I should have called you about this. Some of the Baha'is in Baltimore got together, and these were white Baha'is. They got together and they said to themselves, what can we do given what's going on? And you know what they decided to do? They decided to have a prayer gathering to, what they said is to honor black men and shower love upon black men. The focus of the prayer gathering was to honor black men and shower love upon black men. And so they invited the black men of the community just to pray together and honor them and shower love upon them. That's not a trite thing. That was very moving. I mean, when I heard about it, I had friends over at the house. But I got in my car and I went. I heard about it the day before because this is such a powerful healing force, right? So these activities can be real. I want to share a statement with you, and because I think the Baha'i faith does deal with the reality of what's going on. I mean, it's not a namby-pamby religion. It gets at the heart of dealing with racism. And so there's a passage, and I heard this one a long time ago. This isn't a Baha'i statement, but it was a statement from somebody at a conference. He said, if you do not understand racism, what it is and how it works, everything else you understand will only confuse you. He said, if you do not understand racism, what it is, how it works, everything else you understand will only confuse you.
Yeah. And I think that's Neely Fuller too.
Yeah, I don't know who said that for the first time, but then I thought about that, and then I remember reading in the Baha'i teachings where Shoghi Effendi, who was the great-grandson of the Prophet founder, said racial prejudice, the corrosion of which for well nigh a century has bitten into the fiber and attacked the whole social structure of society. I'm going to pause this just for a minute. So welcome back. I made a mistake. Somebody came to the door here, and I turned. I thought I was putting it on pause, and I turned it off. So hopefully, this segment will be aired as well. But I was talking to Neodoy about this particular quote about what the Baha'i teaching said about racism or prejudice had bitten into the fiber and attacked the whole social structure of this country. And so there's a passage from the Baha'i teachings that was written in actually 1937. And I wanted Nito to comment on it. We don't have much time left, but I want him to comment on this. And also for people that are listening to know that there's some very substantive teachings in the Baha'i faith that people are called upon to integrate into their practical application of spirituality. So it's not just be nice to other people. It really is working on ourselves to transform in ways that are real. So I mentioned the great-grandson of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder named Shoghi Effendi. Just read parts of this, and I want Nito to comment on it. In fact, I'll break it up so it's not too long. But this passage says a tremendous effort is required by both races. And this was talking about the blacks and the whites. Again, this was in 1937 this is written. It says a tremendous effort is required by both races if their outlook, their manners, and conduct are to reflect in this darkened age the spirit and teachings of the faith of Baha'u'llah. And then it says, casting away once and for all the fallacious doctrine of racial superiority. It says, with all its attendant evils and confusions and miseries, and welcoming and encouraging the intermixture of races and tearing barriers down that now divide them. They said they should endeavor day and night to fulfill their particular responsibilities in the common task which so urgently faces them. So this is how this passage is led into. It talks about racial superiority, that doctrine of racial superiority, which was so prevalent in the 30s and 20s and really ever since the inception of this country, but that still takes place. But then this passage goes down and it breaks down. It says there's a mutual responsibility from a spiritual context in dealing with this issue. And it talks about what the blacks have to do, and it talks about what the whites have to do. And it refers to whites as whites. It refers to blacks because this was written in 1937, uses the term Negro. So first I'm going to read you what it says about what whites have to do and just see if you have any comment, and then what blacks have to do, what it says we have to do together. First, it says, let the white make a supreme effort in their resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem. To abandon, it says, once and for all, their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority. To correct their tendency toward revealing a patronizing attitude toward the members of the other race, and to persuade them, it says, through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them, of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions. And this part I think is so profound too. It says, and to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who've received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. So that's what this passage says that white folks need to do in their part to address racial prejudice, and I think it's still true today. But I wondered if you had any comment on that particular passage.
Yeah, well, I like what it said about to supreme effort to master any. It talks about to a certain level of impatience. It talks about a certain level of impatience to overcome that. Mm-hmm. So, from what it's telling them is that they have to really, oh, there it is, right there. Stop. See, that's a stop right there.
Yeah, but I don't want to stop. I'm going to pause. Sorry for that little break. Again, we're at the Baha'i Center, and we had to take care of something here. So we're good. We're back live.
Okay.
Okay. So go ahead.
So, Imam Ali said the intrinsic value of knowledge is that you act upon it. Like, in the gospel it talks about like how if I told you to love your brothers, like how am I basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but how am I pushing you? Mm-hmm. What are you doing? But he said to love your enemies, right?
Right.
So he's what he's doing is pushing you beyond your
right.
your comfort zone, right?
Right.
Pushing. So it's telling them to be extremely patient, right? Because these people has been oppressed for
a long time,
centuries,
right?
So he's telling them to be extremely patient, to keep pursuing,
right,
let them understand like the sincerity of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So right, so he's giving them what's the word? Not agenda, but he's giving them something to do that requires struggle.
Right.
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 He's telling them, like, these people been suffering, so just because they don't respond the first time you say,
Hello.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, but to continue,
Right.
right? And so, once again, it's this whole, I don't know if it's dialectic, but this whole process of struggle and strengthening, right?
Right.
Becoming better, because what he's actually doing in the spiritual realm is increasing their capacity,
Right.
right?
Right. And that's where you got to look at. Again, reading that quote out of a spiritual context, I imagine, I'm not white, but I imagine for some people I've talked to, it says an inherent sense of superiority. That's pretty deep. And so I'd have to wrestle with that and saying, this is what you have to do. You got to wrestle with that.
Mm-hmm.
This thing that may be a tendency of yours, and look at your patronizing attitude and persuade.
Mm-hmm.
Means you got to take time again.
Yeah.
And so, again, I love the way you said that about it, strengthening your spiritual capacity. Now, because there's mutuality in
And to
this.
act upon the knowledge of our religion, right?
Well, exactly.
So he's giving them a direct perspective or a direct manifestation of how to act upon the knowledge base of the religion, right?
Well, it is, and I want to get to this because we only got a few minutes left.
Okay.
I hate to cut you off. It says what black folks have to do. Again, the term Negro.
Uh-oh.
It says, let the Negroes through a corresponding effort on their part show by every means in their power the warmth of their response, their readiness to forget the past, and their ability to wipe out every trace of suspicion that still may linger in their hearts and minds. And then it goes on to say, and I'm not going to have time to read this whole thing, but I want to let you comment on this. It says, let neither think, again, because of the spiritual context that we're dealing with this from, let neither think that the solution of so vast a problem is a matter that exclusively concerns the other. And then it talks about the qualities that it's going to take to do this. It says it will take genuine love, extreme patience, true humility, consummate tact, sound initiative, mature wisdom, deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort to do what both groups need to do. But just comment on what it says that black folks need to do. What your reaction to that and what you think that means. And we just got a couple minutes left.
Once again, he's pushing us beyond the regular. He's pushing us beyond our material selves,
Right.
To something that's higher,
Right.
something that all the prophets have done, right?
Right.
They always forgave. They always were
Right.
patient. They always,
Over and over.
over and over,
Right.
over and over.
Right.
But because of that, what happened hundreds of years later, as you see, you have kingdoms in the name of Muhammad.
Right.
You have kingdoms in the name of Christ, right?
Right.
It didn't happen overnight, but because that seed,
Right.
because of this persistence, right? The same persistence is building a reality that's changing. And so what he's doing really is, instead of internalizing oppression,
Right.
is empowering them.
Right.
But the power stems from their spiritual reality. So that's, to me,
It's the power of it. And when it says readiness to forget the past, I know, when I first became a Baha'i, right? And I was reading this stuff. And I was also very active in dealing with racial issues, which I still am. I said, readiness to forget the past. That goes against every grain that I could think of. And I said, well, I believe this is true. So how might it be true? And then when I realized it as I got older, I realized that I don't think it means having amnesia. I don't think it means that we don't understand that the past happened. I think that what it means is, as I interact with individuals who are white, that I'm trying not to bring all of that with me, right? I'm trying not to come with expectation they're going to be this and read into everything that they say, And even if there is prejudice in them, that I'm trying not to carry that baggage, which takes, again, everything you've talked about. It takes a spiritual consciousness to do that. It takes a renewal day by day to do that. And I always say that spirituality and religion is a completely renewable resource. It never ends. You can always keep drawing on it over and over, which is what it takes to deal with this racism. But I have to sign off here because my time is up. I want to thank you, Neodoy, for being on the show. We could go on for days about this topic. Maybe we can talk again. But meanwhile, to those who are listening, remember to transform yourselves, transform your communities, claim your nobility. Thank you very much.
Do